a fugitive drug dealer from the Midwest, is determined to avoid capture at all costs. His escape is marked by reckless violence, drug abuse, and high-speed chases. As he moves across state lines, both local and state law enforcement agencies unite in a relentless effort to bring him to justice. When law enforcement officers become the target, no one is safe. To stop a dealer who is willing to open fire on police, it takes a coordinated effort. I'm Jim Carlstrom, former head of the FBI's New York field office. In this case, the people of the Midwest worked alongside the FBI, as well as state and local authorities, to ensure that this dangerous criminal was finally brought to justice. On February 2nd, 2000, Lincoln County Deputy Sheriff Stan McKnight was on a routine patrol in Nebraska. As he drove down a deserted road, he noticed a vehicle approaching from behind at an alarming speed. A maroon pickup truck sped past him, its Texas license plate catching his attention, though he couldn't make out the numbers. With caution, McKnight decided to follow. The roads were covered in black ice, making the chase even riskier. There were no streetlights, and visibility was poor. The driver of the pickup suddenly veered onto a side road, prompting the deputy to call for backup. State troopers soon joined pursuit, attempting to stop the reckless driver. However, the man behind the wheel showed no concern for his own safety. Since traffic was minimal, he continued accelerating, pushing the limits of his vehicle. At such high speeds, the chase became too dangerous to continue. He seemed to know the area well and was driving incredibly fast. It was only a matter of time before he lost us. Eventually, the maroon pickup disappeared into the night. Despite calling in additional units and sweeping the entire region, law enforcement came up empty-handed. That night, the fugitive got away. A week later, a farmer near North Platte, Nebraska, about 40 miles from where the chase occurred, made an unusual discovery. Having not used his barn for a while, he was surprised to find an assortment of suspicious supplies inside. When police arrived, they uncovered various chemicals and equipment commonly found in agricultural stores. While such items weren't unusual for the region, their specific combination raised a red flag. The materials were all essential ingredients for manufacturing methamphetamine, an illegal and highly addictive drug known on the streets as crystal or speed. In rural areas, makeshift meth labs are common. There are plenty of abandoned buildings where people can set up shop without being noticed, explained Corporal Casey Nerms of the Lincoln County Sheriff's Department. Over recent years, the Midwest had been battling a rising meth epidemic. The drug was not only dangerously addictive, but also had severe psychological effects. Users often experience a surge of energy and confidence, followed by paranoia and an overwhelming craving for more. Many became aggressive, unstable, and violent. Wherever meth labs pop up, violent crime isn't far behind. As officers combed through the barn-turned-drug lab, they found a set of letters. The name on them, Charles Moses, Jr., from Nocona, Texas. Authorities immediately contacted law enforcement in Texas and requested more information on Moses. Soon, they received photos and a criminal record. The man was wanted for multiple offenses, including weapons theft. To make matters worse, a maroon pickup truck with Texas plates was registered under his name, the exact same model that had evaded Deputy McKnight just a week earlier. If Charles Moses was running a meth lab, then chances are he was also using the drug himself. That would explain why he drove so recklessly that night. One officer speculated, meth users are known for their erratic behavior. They barely sleep, feel little to no pain, and can be dangerously unpredictable. Officers began questioning locals, showing the Moses photograph. In a small rural community, outsiders rarely go unnoticed. Several people recalled seeing him around, confirming that he had been in the area. We were confident that he hadn't gone far. But the problem was no one had seen him in days, and he had no fixed address. A week after discovering the meth lab, on the night of February 12, 2000, Corporal Casey Nerms was wrapping up his shift. Before heading home, he stopped by a local diner to grab a coffee. Hey, how's it going? Good, and you? Same as always. But this night was anything but ordinary. Through the diner's window, Nerms noticed a truck parked outside. It matched the description of Charles Moses' maroon pickup. Goodbye, have a nice night. Take care. As Nurm stepped outside, he made his way toward the truck, hoping to get a closer look at the driver. The man inside looked just like Charles Moses. The truck had Texas plates. Trying to stay calm, Nurms casually approached and started a conversation. "How are the roads tonight?" "Pretty slick." "Where you headed?" "Nowhere in particular." The officer asked for identification, and when the driver handed over his license, the name confirmed it. "Charles Moses. You're under arrest." Nurms assumed that now, with the right suspect and vehicle, taking Moses into custody would be a straightforward process. He was wrong. Before the officer could react, Moses lunged at him, grabbing for his gun. A struggle ensued. "Give me the gun." Moses pulled the trigger. A shootout erupted in the parking lot. Nurms fired back, certain that at least 2 of his shots had hit the back of the truck's cabin. But fueled by meth and desperation, Moses managed to slam his foot on the gas and speed off into the night. State troopers immediately joined the chase. This time, Moses wouldn't just be a fugitive. He would soon become a murderer. Deputy Stan McKnight, the officer who had previously pursued the maroon pickup, was on patrol when he heard the radio chatter about another high-speed chase involving the same vehicle. Determined to intercept Moses, McKnight positioned himself at a vantage point where he could monitor 3 different roads at once. I parked in the center, so I had a clear view for almost a mile in both directions. 15 minutes passed. Then, from the west, headlights appeared, barreling toward the intersection. As the vehicle sped closer, McKnight flipped on his emergency lights. And there it was, the maroon pickup, the same truck he had lost nearly 2 weeks ago. He must have been going at least 80 miles per hour. It was pitch dark, and within moments, he was out of my sight again. McKnight engaged in pursuit, struggling to keep up as Moses tore through the rural roads. I had to be careful. I didn't know if he'd turn off somewhere, and I couldn't risk losing control on the icy roads. Suddenly, in the distance, brake lights flickered. Moses had stopped at a crossroad. McKnight immediately radioed for backup. This was no ordinary suspect. Moses had already fired on an officer earlier that night. Confronting him alone would be suicide. As McKnight waited, Moses made his move. Gunshots rang out in the darkness. One bullet struck McKnight in the head. Another ripped through his hand. The force of the impact sent a shockwave through his body. His vision blurred, and he struggled to stay conscious. I tried to radio for help, but my mouth was filling with blood. I was choking. Desperate to stop the bleeding, he grabbed a handful of napkins from the passenger seat, stuffing them into his mouth. I spat out as much blood as I could so I could finally speak. Over the radio, his strained voice crackled through. "I've been shot. Suspect heading east. I'm still in pursuit." Despite his serious injuries, McKnight refused to let Moses escape. Wind howled through the shattered windshield, shards of glass scattering across the dashboard. His left eye was completely covered in blood, but with his right eye, he blinked through the pain, keeping his sights locked on Moses' truck. As McKnight relayed his location, state troopers positioned themselves strategically, blacking out their headlights so they wouldn't alert Moses to their presence. Minutes later, a pair of approaching headlights emerged from the darkness. It was him. One officer caught a glimpse of a rifle inside the truck. Moses didn't hesitate. He opened fire. The officers returned fire, unloading their entire magazines. The gunfight lasted mere seconds, but the damage was devastating. One state trooper was hit in the chest. His bulletproof vest, normally designed to stop handgun rounds, was pierced by a high-powered rifle bullet. "I'm hit. I need medical assistance," the trooper gasped, struggling to stay conscious. The nearest hospital was 10 miles away. Other officers rushed to stabilize him, praying he would make it. Meanwhile, Moses once again disappeared into the night. As dawn broke, investigators combed to the bullet-riddled patrol vehicles. Sergeant Lynn Williams from the Nebraska State Patrol arrived at the scene. We needed to secure every piece of evidence. His weapon, the shell casings, the damage to our vehicles, everything mattered. Ballistics experts analyzed the bullets recovered from the police cruisers. The rounds were high-velocity projectiles, fired from a Semenov semi-automatic rifle, a powerful military weapon. This wasn't just some guy with a stolen handgun. He was heavily armed and extremely dangerous. With Moses still on the run, Nebraska law enforcement reached out to the FBI. At the normally quiet FBI office in North Nebraska, agents received an urgent request for assistance. "We mainly handle financial crimes," one agent explained. "We don't usually get pulled into violent criminal cases like this." Given the severity of the situation, the FBI issued a federal arrest warrant for Moses. "We knew if he crossed state lines, the FBI would have jurisdiction. That way, we could expand the manhunt beyond Nebraska." Law enforcement established a command center at a local military base, coordinating efforts between federal, state, and local agencies. Moses had a pattern. In the past, he had used abandoned farms and barns to set up makeshift meth labs and as temporary hideouts. "Those were the places we needed to search first," an officer noted. With hundreds of officers now hunting him, Charles Moses became one of the most wanted men in the country. But finding him wouldn't be easy. He had no known residence, no family nearby, and no predictable habits. The only clue was the last outfit he was seen wearing, a light-colored winter jacket. With little else to go on, authorities turned to the public. They urged citizens to stay away from Moses and report any sightings immediately. They knew one thing for certain: wherever Moses went, violence followed. In Dickens, Nebraska, about 30 miles south of where Moses had last been seen, a young farmer arrived at his family's garage. Normally, his parents' car would be parked inside, but today it was gone. Instead, a maroon pickup truck sat in its place. Recognizing the vehicle from news reports, the farmer immediately called the police. When officers arrived, they confirmed the worst. This was Charles Moses' truck. He had been here. The evidence was undeniable. Bullet holes riddled the rear of the truck, likely from the shootout with officers. The windshield was shattered, with glass fragments scattered across the seats. More chilling, blood stains covered the interior. "We had proof that Moses had been injured," an officer explained. But knowing him, that wouldn't slow him down. Despite his wounds, Moses had one major advantage: methamphetamine. The drug kept him awake, alert, and aggressive, making him even more dangerous. A search of the truck revealed survival gear, police radio scanners, and makeshift meth lab equipment. But the semi-automatic rifle he had used against law enforcement? Nowhere to be found. "We knew he was still armed," one detective said. "And if he was willing to shoot at police, there was no telling what he'd do next." An hour after the truck was discovered, nearly 60 miles away, a nervous caller contacted authorities. The man claimed to have just seen Moses at a rest stop in Ogallala, Nebraska. The fugitive had been listening to a radio news broadcast when he suddenly panicked and sped off. He realized his truck had been found and took off immediately, the witness explained. Out of fear, the man waited 15 minutes before reporting the sighting. "That delay cost us valuable time," one officer admitted. "By the time we arrived, Moses was long gone." Authorities now feared he would abandon another vehicle and steal a new one. 2 hours later, 30 miles south of the rest stop, a farmer noticed fresh tire tracks leading to an old and used building on his property. Suspicious, he called his family. None of them had parked there. His family, aware of the manhunt, immediately warned him, "Get out of there, now!" But before the farmer could escape, the person on the phone heard his voice change. The farmer was talking to someone else. The police would soon realize that Charles Moses had just claimed his first murder victim. By February 14th, 2000, 36 hours after Moses shot 2 officers, his escape had taken a deadly turn. A murder investigation was now underway. The victim was a farmer who had discovered Moses hiding on his property. Investigators pieced together what had happened based on forensic evidence at the crime scene. Moses must have been hiding in the barn when the farmer found him, an officer explained. Instead of running, Moses executed him. The victim's body was dragged out his truck and left on the ground. Moses then stole the farmer's vehicle and drove away. But he didn't leave cleanly. Broken glass from the driver's side window lay scattered in the dirt. This suggested something important. A bullet had been fired through the window. "We knew Moses would claim self-defense," said Special Agent Ron Rail. But the physical evidence told a different story. Forensic analysts examined the shattered glass. When a high-speed bullet hits glass, it leaves specific patterns. By analyzing direction and dispersion of the shards, experts determined the shot had come from outside the vehicle. No shots were fired from inside. In other words, Moses had executed the farmer before he ever had a chance to defend himself. This was murder, plain and simple. With Moses now responsible for murder, the FBI escalated the case. They obtained a new federal arrest warrant for vehicle theft and homicide. "We needed to catch him before he killed again," said Rail. Since Moses had stolen the farmer's truck, police put out an urgent statewide alert. They also contacted cell phone providers to track the victim's stolen phone. Even when a phone is in use, it constantly pings the nearest cell tower to maintain a signal. 2 hours after the farmer's murder, a cell tower in Oshkosh, Nebraska briefly detected the stolen phone. But by the time police arrived, the signal was gone. Moses was still one step ahead. Meanwhile, forensic teams analyzed bullets from the murder scene. These rounds were high velocity, an expert confirmed, likely fired from a Semenov SKS rifle. It was the same weapon used against the police officers. That proved two things. 1, Moses was still armed with the same rifle. 2, he was now even more dangerous. Following the murder and vehicle theft, Nebraska's governor issued a public warning. Charles Moses is a deadly threat. He has already shot at law enforcement and killed an innocent man. Stay inside. Lock your doors. If you see him, call 911 immediately. Almost 80 miles away, in a quiet town near the Nebraska-Wyoming border, an elderly woman was enjoying a peaceful evening at home. Then she heard something terrifying. Someone had broken in. She froze as the intruder moved through her house, heading toward her bedroom. She had no way to escape. Instead, she did the only thing she could. She hid through the darkness. She listened as the man rummaged through her belongings. Then, just as suddenly as he arrived, he was gone. Once she was sure he had left, she ran to her neighbor's house and called the police. She never saw his face. But law enforcement didn't need confirmation. The break-in occurred just miles from where Moses had last been seen. The pieces were coming together. He was heading west. With Charles Moses now moving west toward the Nebraska-Wyoming border, authorities in both states were put on high alert. The Scottsbluff County Sheriff's Office responded to the elderly woman's home invasion and discovered crucial evidence. Near the tire tracks outside, officers found shattered glass matching the driver's side window of the stolen farmer's truck, confirming that Moses had been there. Police immediately notified the FBI. The evidence pointed to one conclusion, said a Nebraska state trooper. Moses was still using the stolen truck, and he was headed west into Wyoming, with the fugitive now suspected to be in eastern Wyoming. The FBI alerted local law enforcement in the region. In the small town of Lusk, Wyoming, Chief Gary Gill received the emergency alert. "We got the warning that morning. We were told he was in a blue pickup with Nebraska plates, but we didn't know which direction he was going." The nationwide manhunt was closing in, but it was a trucker's call that gave police their biggest lead yet. A long-haul truck driver phoned the police with a tip. A blue pickup truck, matching Moses' stolen vehicle, was parked at a Lusk rest stop. Officers rushed to the location, scanning the dozens of vehicles in the lot. "We checked every license plate carefully," said an officer. "Finally, we found it. The Nebraska plates matched the stolen vehicle. The truck was still running, but the windows were fogged up, making it impossible to see inside. There was no way to know for sure if Moses was in that truck," said Chief Gill. "And if he was, there was no telling what he might do. They had to be careful. If Moses woke up and realized he was surrounded, a shootout in a crowded rest stop was a real possibility. We couldn't afford to take that risk," Gill explained. Instead of storming in, officers strategically blocked the truck's escape routes and waited. Then they saw movement inside the vehicle. Moses was waking up. For a brief moment, he seemed disoriented, coming down from his meth binge. Then he realized what was happening. He slammed his truck into gear and took off. The chase was on once again. Moses tore through Lusk, speeding toward Highway 85. Officers feared he would make it onto the main road, where he could disappear again. Our worst fear was that he'd reach the highway, said Gil. If he got there, we might never find him again. But Moses was out of options. Trying to evade the police, he swerved onto a rugged dirt road, heading for the Wyoming wilderness. That one decision may have sealed his fate. Moses pushed the stolen truck to its limits, speeding across rough terrain. But his recklessness came at a price. As he sped over a ditch, the truck's undercarriage slammed into the ground. Within moments, it stalled. Moses had crashed. But by the time officers reached the vehicle, he was gone. All that remained were muddy footprints, disappearing into the dense Wyoming wilderness. He had taken off on foot, heading for the hills, said an officer. Authorities locked down the entire area, but Moses had vanished once again. With Moses now hiding in the vast wilderness, the FBI made a critical decision. They deployed a SWAT team from Nebraska to assist in the search. This wasn't just a fugitive anymore, said Special Agent Ron Rail. This was an armed and dangerous killer. The FBI also dispatched 2 helicopters, scanning the terrain for any sign of Moses. After hours of searching, they found something, a mud-covered pickup truck, abandoned in a ravine. But Moses was nowhere to be seen. The problem was he could be hiding anywhere, said Rail. Behind a tree, in a ditch, waiting to ambush us. The FBI SWAT team prepared to move in, but before they could act, Moses disappeared once again. That night, just miles away, Wyoming farmer Jim Kramers and his son Justin were at home when they heard their dog barking wildly. Armed with his rifle, Jim stepped outside. In the darkness, he saw a figure moving near the barn. I knew someone was out there, he recalled, and I had a bad feeling about who it was. It was Charles Moses. Jim shouted, "I'm armed. Don't move." But Moses didn't run. Instead, he slowly raised his hands. "I'm just looking for some food," he said. Jim wasn't fooled. This man had killed before. This was the moment they had been waiting for. Jim signaled to his son, whispering, "Go around back. Get your gun. If this goes bad, do what you have to do." Justin slipped into shadows, circling around Moses. For the first time, Charles Moses was outnumbered. On a dark, cold night in eastern Wyoming, Jim Kramers and his son Justin found themselves in a dangerous standoff with one of the most wanted men in the country, Charles Moses. Jim had his rifle raised, while Justin had quietly moved behind Moses, ensuring he had no easy way out. They both knew the truth. This man had already killed once and wouldn't hesitate to do it again. But Jim played it smart. Instead of threatening Moses, he offered him something he desperately needed. "You must be freezing. I'll make you a deal. Put your guns down, and I'll get you a warm meal and some clean clothes." Moses hesitated. Days of running had left him exhausted, wounded, and starving. He was coming down from a meth binge, and for the first time in weeks, his mind was beginning to clear. This was Jim's chance. He just had to keep Moses calm long enough to get him inside, where they could call the police. Moses slowly lowered his weapons, but his eyes darted back and forth, searching for an escape route. Then he asked, "Where's the other guy?" He had noticed Justin was missing. Jim stayed calm. "He's inside, waiting for us. Come on in. Let's get you some food." Moses took a deep breath, nodded, and stepped forward. At that moment, Justin had his rifle trained on Moses from behind. "One wrong move, and I would have pulled the trigger," Justin later admitted. Jim led Moses into the house, keeping conversation casual. Inside, Jim made sure Moses was distracted with food, then quietly slipped into another room. He grabbed the phone and called the police. "He's here. He's in my house. Send backup now." Within minutes, a Wyoming state trooper and a game warden arrived, parking down the road. They moved in silently, knowing they had one chance to catch Moses off guard. Back inside, Jim knew something was wrong. Moses was eating, but his paranoia was creeping back in. His eyes kept darting toward the windows. Jim knew he had to stall him just a little longer. Then Moses froze. He heard a vehicle pulling up outside. Jim barely had time to react before Moses jumped to his feet. The front door burst open, and the officers rush inside. "Get on the ground. Hands where we can see them." Moses was trapped. For the first time since his escape 2 weeks ago, he had nowhere left to run. Charles Moses Jr., one of the most violent fugitives in recent history, was finally in custody. After weeks on the run, a deadly police shootout, and the murder of an innocent farmer, his crime spree was over. Moses was taken to a Wyoming hospital to be treated for his gunshot wound, dehydration, and exhaustion. His meth fuel rampage had finally caught up with him. Meanwhile, FBI Special Agent Ron Rail arrived the next morning to formally charge Moses. Since the crime spanned multiple states, Moses faced charges from both Nebraska and Wyoming. Attempted murder of police officers, murder of a farmer, weapons charges, drug manufacturing and distribution. To avoid the death penalty, Moses pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and attempted murder. He was sentenced to 190 years in prison, ensuring he would never walk free again. Despite his injuries, Deputy Stan McKnight survived the shooting to the head and hand. It took him 23 months of therapy and 9 surgeries, but he returned to duty. "I wasn't going to let him take my career from me, too," he said. The Nebraska state trooper who was shot in the chest also survived, thanks to his bulletproof vest. As for Jim and Justin Kramers, their quick thinking and bravery helped bring one of the most dangerous criminals in the country to justice. Even after Moses' capture, the meth crisis in the Midwest didn't end. But law enforcement remained committed to the fight, determined to stop other violent criminals before they could wreak the same kind of havoc. "We lost a lot of good people to this drug, but we won't stop fighting," said an officer. "And we won't let another Charles Moses terrorize our communities again."